4, 5, and through 7. So this is after Abner was killed. So after the time of mourning, David's now full king, has nobody battling for the throne. But David being a righteous man and Abner being put to death in a term that was not... He made peace with Abner. At that point, Abner was an ally, and somebody who was on David's side decided that he was going to seek vengeance against Abner. And so he killed him, even though David had peace. So that's what's happening here. And then we learn about this grandson of Jonathan, grandson of Saul, Jonathan's son. So picking up in verse 5. The sons of Reuben the Berite, Rechab and Baanah, went and came about the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, who lay in bed at noon. So we see also that these are the men that were under Saul to take care of Ishbosheth. They were the same men that tended to him every day. So they would have been men he trusted. Because that's what they did. They made sure he got what he needed. But this also shows what happens, the distinction in what the time was. Although it was very deceitful, it showed that no longer it was a kingdom of Saul. No longer Saul's influence was around. It was time for David to set up his throne and be king. So verse 6, and they came thither into the midst of the house, as though they would have fetched wheat, and they smote him under the 5th rib, and Rechab and Baanah his brother escaped. So they kind of sneak in there and kill him. And we see how he's bedridden, he's lame, he ain't able to move about. And then they sneak to kill him. This shows, first off, that David would have never considered him a threat anyway. We see, it's probably in the next few chapters, but there's actually a descendant of Jonathan and one of his sons that he invites into the palace. Whichever of this group is left is who he invites in. I believe and there's only one left, but I believe if there would have been others, if he would have got to Ishbosheth first, he would have invited him into his palace. Because of his friendship he had with Jonathan. But these guys just sneak in and act as cowards. Kind of like similar to even what we see how Abner was killed by him calling him over. But at least at that point Abner was battle ready, It was still deceitful, but this took it to a whole new low. And we got to understand that the world uses such tactics that low. And we just got to pray for them, because we can't go down to that level. We got to stand and follow Christ and not turn that way. So verse 7. For when they came into the house, he lay on his bed in his bedchamber, and smote him and slew him, and beheaded him and took his head, and gat them away through the plain all night. So there's similarities where they may be not of sound mind. First off, cutting off a head. We see David doing that with Goliath. It was kind of a trophy saying, well, clearly without a head, the person's dead. So it's showing that you conquered them. You conquered this great soldier. If you cut off a lame man's head as a trophy, no person of military prowess would consider that a trophy. Dude was bedridden. Even if it was like Goliath, but he was in a terminally ill state, as big as he was, it wouldn't have been considered a trophy. The state of this even soldier determined whether it was a trophy or not. And we see in Judges a story that's a little different, where the person's fatigued from war, a woman gives him milk, and then which helps him even more fall asleep, and uses that. She uses quick-wittedness not to allow him to die, not deceit. She uses her brains to. But here it's just deceitful thing after deceitful thing to remove Saul's family. And the thing is, we see in the opening of the book how the guy came and claimed that he murdered Saul and David had him killed. The people should know by this point that standing against that ain't going to win no favors with David. Because David's a man of integrity. Just as we got to understand, even if what we do seems good, if we stand in deceit to get it, then God ain't going to approve. We got to get to the good through the good methods. It's got to be the good path the entire way for God to approve. If we trick somebody and it turns out good, it ain't perfect to God's plan. Because for it to have been perfect, it wouldn't have had to trick them in the first place. And then oftentimes people try to use this manipulation stuff and force God's hand. Even without doing manipulation, people try to force God's hand. We see how David waited to be king patiently. If anybody should have been trying to get the throne for David, it should have been himself. But we see other people trying to make things happen, which David has faith in God. David's attitude is, I waited this long to be king. God's making it happen now. These people don't need to be doing this. And that's why he's grieving over the deaths of Abner and even grieved over the death of Saul. Because David knew it was going to happen. David knew the Lord's promise was going to happen. And when we force God's hand, it shows the lack of faith in God's promise. We see with Abraham doing that and the whole incident with Ishmael being born and the trouble that caused. Because he forced God's hand because he didn't believe the promise was intended the way God meant it to be. So we got to stay true and hold to the faith. Otherwise we're going to be doing tactics similar to this that force God's hand. Because we may have all the right motives. We just got to have the patience and faith to wait.